Hello again, everybody. I'm Chris Mooneyham from the NFHS Network, 680 The Fan, and of course, from the Touchdown Club of Atlanta. And welcome to this week's edition, a Turkey Day edition of My Take. Now, thanks for tuning in, everybody. No matter when you're watching the My Take segment of our weekly web blogs brought to you by the Touchdown Club of Atlanta, Fox 5, 680 The Fan, our host of sponsors. Here's hoping you had a great Thanksgiving holiday. All right, let's get right into My Take this week. Of course, the biggest story around, well, arguably, the state football playoffs, obviously very, very big. But we also learned this week, of course, about reclassification. The numbers were made official across the state of Georgia for the estimated, the fall enrollment numbers at high schools across the state of Georgia. And, of course, the estimate of what they'll pull out for the rest of the year. And so how that affects the biggest sports across the state of Georgia with reclassification coming around, we started to get a really great idea of this past week. First off, the Big 44, as it's been called, let's go ahead and get rid of that name. Look, I've said this many times throughout doing my play-by-play or on the NFHS Network, my time with you all here at the Touchdown Club of Atlanta web blogs, and of course, while being on 680 The Fan or my play-by-play. I'll be the first guy to chastise myself when I'm wrong. But I'll also let you know, because it's part of the business, when I'm right, okay? And I was right on this one. This is not going to be a Big 44, the 7th classification for the state of Georgia. There were just too many schools that were exploding enrollment-wise. And that's a good thing. I'm not trying to brag on myself for being right. My point is, it's a good, really good thing that we have 48 plus schools that are going to be in this highest classification. And here's the reason why. Remember how we do the playoffs now. We have 8 classifications and the top 4 from, we have 8 regions in each classification, and the top 4 from each region make the playoffs. That forms your 32-team playoffs in classes 2 through 6. We add the 7th classification, and we were fearful with these teams being spread out that we would not be able to form more than 4 teams in some regions in our 8 regions in the highest classifications. That worry is now null and void. With 48 teams, and by the way, we're going to end up with more than 48 teams. You mark my words. I think we'll be closer to 50. Somewhere, we'll definitely be at 48. I would say 50, maybe 51. We'll wait and see. I'll get into that in a moment. But remember, we were worried that we may have a power ranking system to determine the lowest seeded teams in our playoffs. Now, that is not going to happen. Okay, so we'll have 7 classifications. We'll have 8 regions in each classification, and we will have 32-team playoffs in 2A through 7A. Okay, and in the lowest classification, we'll have a 24-team tournament in private and public. Okay. Also, we have to talk about the 3% multiplier, quote unquote. That's just what I'm calling it. Remember, this was the rule that states that if you are a private school or a city school, and if 3% of your enrollment comes from outside of your county, not your city, but your county of origin, and that's a big, big difference. I'll get to that in a second. That means that you had to be bumped up in classification. Now, why is that big? We know, obviously, geographically, you're talking about a larger space to draw from when you're talking about county as opposed to city. Even the biggest, most successful city schools, yes, they pull a student body from outside of their city, but even the most successful don't pull as many students from outside of their county of origin as many would suspect. And so there were a lot of city schools that did not get bumped up when a lot of people thought that they would. Only Buford, Jefferson, and Bremen of the biggest city schools were bumped up. That Bremen will surprise some people, by the way. We knew Buford would, so they get bumped up a classification. Jefferson was right there on the click. That surprises some people, doesn't surprise others. Bremen surprises me, quite frankly. But schools like Calhoun, Rome, Dublin, Calhoun, Carrollton, and Cartersville, obviously 2 of the biggest. So the biggest 3 really that you would imagine that did not get bumped up that we thought might, Carrollton, Cartersville, and Calhoun all do not get bumped up a classification despite the 3.0% inside of your county multiplier. As for private schools, they were hit far deeper, and I mean far deeper. Schools like Blessed Trinity, St. Pius, Westminster, Marist, Greater Atlanta Christian, Lovett, Woodward Academy, all of these schools will now be bumped up in classification. And of course, most of the schools that I just mentioned, that not a big surprise that they were bumped up in classification. By the way, one school of interest that was also not bumped up, Benedictine. Benedictine stayed down at the AA classification. Really, really interesting, the amount of schools that are potentially moving up or staying in classification. Remember, I mentioned this a moment ago, and I want to make sure to go back to it. Right now, enrollment-wise, the number in the highest classification is 48. But keep in mind that the GHSA is allowing schools to appeal to be in a higher classification. Okay, you can appeal to be in a higher classification. So, if you're a traditional big boy in the history of Georgia high school athletics, like, say, Valdosta, I'm looking at you, Wildcats, because they've done this before. They will probably appeal to be in the 7A classification. Now, I say that, and some of you will turn your head and say, now, whoa, wait a minute. You're telling me Valdosta is not in the highest classification? That's exactly what I'm telling you. Valdosta felt the exact number, 86 students shy of the 7A classification. Expect for them to appeal and expect them to be awarded a spot in that 7th classification. In fact, I know I mentioned this a moment ago. Again, I just want to revisit it really quick. Don't expect for the number in the 7A classification to be at 48 once we begin play in the fall of 16. I would expect that number to be closer to 51 or even 52. That's right. Maybe 4 teams could appeal to play in the highest classification. I actually think it's going to be probably 50. I think that only 2 teams are going to be allowed to move up into the highest classification. We'll see how it turns out. But now we want to look at the timetable really quick. You know, I was going to talk about specific schools this week, but I think that that's kind of beating the drum a little too much. We might talk about it next week on the My Take segment, or maybe I'll just leave it to you to look it up. That way you can peruse all the schools and the enrollment. You can find that anywhere on the internet. You can go to ajc.com. You can go to the GHSF Daily, which does an amazing job. Most of your local newspapers will have it if you're a diehard high school football fan across the state. If you're in Moultrie, if you're in Jessup, if you're in Augusta, if you're in Ringgold, most of them will have it because those are high school football hotbeds, obviously. But remember the schedule. Here's what we're looking at. Leading through the Thanksgiving weekend, through Thanksgiving, after this was announced earlier in the week or last week, if you prefer, depending on when you're watching the My Take segment here. Schools are currently, as you're sitting here watching this, as we're speaking, they are appealing their classification. Remember, you can't appeal to move down. You can't appeal to move down. The numbers are what they are. If you've been placed in 7A, you're playing in 7A. I'm looking at you, Osborne. Man, my alma mater is going to... No, wait, Osborne, did they make the 7? I got to double check it now. See, a school like that, yeah, Osborne is playing in the 6A classification. They shouldn't even be playing in 6A, let me tell you. But anyway, go Big Red. But my point being, if you're on the verge of 7A to 6A or 6A to 5A, you cannot appeal to move down. You can only appeal to move up. Now, those appeals will no longer be heard or seen as far as classification come December 1st, because December 1st, the GHSA is going to, not officially, but for the first time, place these teams inside of a region. Then schools, again, will have the opportunity to appeal that region. You know, we don't want to travel all the way from South Georgia to West Georgia, you know, if we're in that region. And those requests will be taken all the way up to December 7th and 8th. Then, by January 13th, we will know not just where each team will be classification-wise, but also where those teams will be placed as far as their regions, and this reclassification will be ratified. So that is D-Day, January 13th. Okay, a lot to get through. Again, if you didn't get any of the information that you think you need here, make sure you visit, well, a million different sources online, and I can bet that we'll end up talking about this again at some point over the month of December. Until next week, I'm Chris Mooneyham. Thanks for joining us again this week. for my take.